I'm Emily at SpyCloud, and in today's demo webinar hybrid, or as I'm eagerly waiting to say, a deminar, we'll be giving you an inside look at SpyCloud's consumer risk protection solution for e-commerce, retail, and really any company that has a vested interest in protecting their customers' account integrity and finding an automated way to reduce the risk of account takeover and online fraud. And today we'll show how SpyCloud can help safeguard consumer digital identities and stop high-risk attacks tied to malware. So you can more confidently and efficiently answer the question, is this a legitimate customer trying to do business with me or a criminal using stolen information? This session is meant to be both interactive and informative, so please add questions using the Zoom Q&A feature, and we'll leave some time at the end to address those. Our subject matter expert today is Mark Gorelick, our Solutions Engineering Manager here at SpyCloud. And Mark has extensive hands-on experience working with organizations that are striving to provide this secure customer experience. So looking forward to hearing some insights from you today, Mark, and let's hand it over to you.
Thanks, Emily. So as Emily said, if you have questions, please, by all means, interrupt me. This will be a lot more interesting with questions and answers as opposed to me just droning on. Don't really want to hear myself talk. I'd much rather hear from you folks. So with that said, let's dive in, shall we? So first, who are we? SpyCloud's mission is to disrupt cybercrime. And you might reasonably ask, well, how do you go about doing that? And the answer is that we have a tremendous amount of information about your customers. In many cases, we have digital assets about their identity, their usernames, passwords, cookies, and so forth. And our mission is to help you disrupt cybercrime by enabling you and your teams to act on what cybercriminals know about their identities. And we're going to focus specifically on customer risk protection today. So the list of items or the list of things that we can do are listed across the bottom. And we have a lot of different capabilities that many e-commerce organizations find very valuable. So how are we going to help you fortify account security? So there are really three elements that we want to emphasize today. The first one is to reduce or de-risk, as we're saying here, customer compromises. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to enforce strong passwords at the time that accounts are created. We're going to check to make sure that accounts haven't been exposed. And that can be done either at login time or at transaction time. We're going to improve your operational efficiency by using automated methods to take advantage of this information. It is our objective to make your lives easier and not more difficult. And the way we're going to do that is that by automating these security checks, we can reduce the need for manual intervention. And then the identification of, I guess if they were undetectable, we wouldn't be able to detect them either. But what we're really saying here is that we have ways of finding out that, or of telling you, I should say, that your customers are risky without, in ways that you wouldn't be able to do without us. So for example, we can identify malware-infected consumers. We harvest tremendous numbers of cookies and so forth. And all of these are ways that you can find out whether your consumers have been exposed. So the real problem that retailers deal with is, frankly, that their customers have terrible IT security hygiene. And criminals know this and have been taking advantage of it in huge quantities. So as we say here, we have seen a 300+% increase in account takeover attacks. That's, by the way, in case you don't know what ATO is, it's account takeover, meaning essentially that someone uses stolen credentials to take over an account. And we've seen a tremendous increase in this over the last couple of years. And then also, since we know everybody's password, basically, we've been able to easily do some calculations on password reuse. And not only do 74% of people that in our database reuse passwords, but this number is actually increasing year over year. It was 72% last year. It's up 2%, which, by the way, boggles my mind because it's something that I think there's increasing awareness of and scrutiny, but it just doesn't seem to be resonating with average users. So people in the IT security space like us know that this is bad. The message is apparently not getting to your consumers. And that's a problem because, as you can see, the overwhelming majority of consumers think that the brand is actually accountable for protecting their accounts. So if someone gets exposed, they don't blame themselves, even though they ought to. Instead, they're more likely to blame the operators of the website that their identity was stolen on or used on, one or the other. We have a tremendous number of assets that we capture every day. We're publishing new records. And last year, we recovered over 20 billion stolen cookies. And this year, and it's only May, we've already recovered 50 million stolen credit card numbers. And we can take advantage of both of those to ensure that your consumers' information hasn't been exposed. Again, if there's questions here, please let me know. So the real question that we're trying to answer is, ultimately, is the person logging in a customer or a criminal? How can you tell? Are you able to tell whether the customers had their credentials exposed by malware? Are you able to tell whether the password that they're using is the same password that they're using on 14 other websites? The thing that we have working against us, we collectively, meaning not only SpyCloud, but the folks on the call today, is that the adversary is essentially better funded and has more time than us. And no one can innovate as fast as cyber criminals, and it's becoming pretty difficult for us to keep pace. However, we do have some ways to make sure that things like people aren't bypassing multi-factor authentication. We can provide a great deal of enhanced visibility by the use of our data. So how exposed are your customers? So we did some analysis on the top 1,000 e-commerce sites, and we came up with some data. And the way SpyCloud works is that we're not collecting data for specific domains. We just collect all the data, and it ends up being applicable to various domains. So we have the ability to look at the top 1,000 e-commerce stores, and we found that on average, there were 7,700 exposures per company. So, that's a pretty ridiculous number. And of course, if you do the math, that means that there's 7.7 million exposed records out there. But this isn't actually all of it either. All this does is the way we calculated, I can't talk. The way we calculated this figure is that we took records where we had seen a particular target URL for one of these e-commerce sites in the malware data. So what this doesn't calculate is all the people that hadn't visited one of these sites yet. So this number is actually going to be considerably higher. So not only do we have credentials and session cookies and passkeys and so forth, but a lot of this other identifiable data is very valuable to people in the world of e-commerce, because we can get not only credentials, but we can also do some attribution for anti-fraud purposes. So in many cases, we capture over 200 different data types from various breaches. So in many cases, we'll end up with not only email, password, cookies, and so forth, but we'll also end up with people's names, phone numbers. I'm not going to read you all the things on the slide here, but you get the general idea. As I mentioned before, we get a ton of credit card data, including all of the stuff that you would need to actually do a transaction. In many cases, we get the home address for people so that they could potentially use a residential proxy to mimic a legitimate user coming from a legitimate location. So this wealth of data that we provide makes it much easier for people in e-commerce to be able to determine not only whether the person is compromised, but who they are and what the criminals know about them. So the trick that e-commerce e-commerce web operators deal with is that there's always this tension between additional friction for a transaction and security. And so the good news for e-commerce folks is that SpyCloud is able to determine how risky somebody actually is. For example, if we find somebody who we have only a couple of credentials for, they don't have extensive password reuse, and there's no malware, then they're a comparatively low risk user. And you can apply less friction to a transaction for such a person. On the other hand, if we find that the user who's logging in has been exposed with malware, potentially has much worse password reuse, is using terrible passwords that have been repeatedly compromised, then you may want to impose either additional friction on the transaction, or potentially you might want to instead have the transaction flagged for manual review. If there aren't any questions, I can dive into the demo aspect.
Yeah, it
Emily,
doesn't
do
look
you have
like
any questions?
no questions so far, but good reminder to prompt the audience that we can even unmute you if you have a more detailed question, or that Q&A box is still open for you. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive into the demo.
Okay, great. Let's do that. So the demo today is going to show how SpyCloud's APIs can work to improve the security posture of a particular user by determining whether or not the user has been exposed, and provide that insight to the e-commerce operators. And so let me drop my share for a moment and share my browser. I trust, Emily, is that share working okay?
Yeah.
Great. So we're going to use a fictitious company here called SpareFactor. And let us imagine for the moment that SpareFactor is the purveyor of amazing audio equipment. And first, we're going to determine whether or not we want to see a low-risk user or a high-risk user. And of course, we're going to start with the low-risk user. And what we're going to show is the user experience here on the left side of the screen, and the API traffic to SpyCloud's data lake on the right side of the screen. So in this case, here's a user logging in, and they've provided their password. And here we have the password. And so what do we know about this user right out of the gate? Well, they've been exposed a couple of times. Once in the Luxottica breach, and for people who don't know, this is the company that operates Ray-Ban. This was a real breach that had many millions of users in it. And in this case, this is a comparatively low severity record. And the reason it's comparatively low severity is because we don't actually have a clear text password for this user. And then they've been exposed a second time in the Forever 21 breach. And you notice, by the way, that as I highlight things, the screen over here shows what I'm highlighting. And in SpyCloud's lingo, a severity 20 record is one where we have a clear text password. And indeed, you can see here, this is the password that we have for this user. So this password has not been reused by this user. Here's some more detail about the breach that comes from our breach catalog, by the way. In this case, the Luxottica breach provided us with over 200 million records. And as you can see, there are a number of assets that we gathered, around 100 million emails, closer to 200 million full names. I'm not going to read the rest of it to you, you get the idea. But the breach catalog provides you with all of this information. So for a low risk transaction, you probably just don't want to provide any friction at all. So we're just going to say no friction here. And the person logs in. And then here they are with some transactions. And they're logged in. Okay, now let's instead talk about someone who's been exposed with malware. Obviously a much higher risk. In this case, we have a different user who logs in. This is the password they're using. And when we send this email address to our API responds with all of these records where we've seen exposures, and most worryingly, they've been exposed by a Rise Pro stealer. And that gives them, in SpyCloud language, a severity of 25, which is a critical severity risk. So you can see all the other information that we got back from the API with all these other different breaches. In this case, here we have this person using the same password on a different site. If we look at the details of this particular breach, so this was the second one on the list. This is a Philippine airline. And you can see again, millions of records exposed. And in this case, we're going to do a password reset for this user. So the person logs in. And because we know that they've been exposed by malware, we're going to make them update their password. And we're going to do that using SMS. So we have a code texted to them. The code is received. Then they put the code in. And now they're prompted for a new password. So this is a key aspect of how the SpyCloud password API works. We're going to look up their intended new password. And the way we're going to do this is using something called k-anonymity. And essentially what this means is we're going to send the hash, a fractional hash of the password to ourselves. And then we're going to respond, the API will respond with all matching hashes that meet this first 5 characters. And you'll see this in action in a minute if that doesn't make any sense. So the person types in their password. Again, this is the password they're trying to use. Here's the first 5 characters. We send, the website sends this 5 characters. That's actually 6. That's 5 characters to the API. And the API response will spit back everything that matches this first 5. And you'll see this in a second here. Okay. And so what happened is this password partial hash was sent to our API, and our API responded with over 2,000 partial matches. But the one that really matters is this one that ends in 248DB, which is right here. And what this tells you is that this password has only been exposed in SpyCloud's data 7 times, which is a very small number. Bearing in mind that we have over 25 billion clear text passwords, the likelihood of finding one that we haven't seen before is fairly low, unless it's something completely random from, let's say, a password manager. But in this case, this password has only been exposed 7 times. So this represents a bit of a tuning knob for the website operator. It might be difficult to come up with a password that's been exposed 0 times. So maybe 7 isn't that bad, but if it was 7,000, you probably would want to have the user pick a different password. This is definitely a your mileage may vary type of situation. But anyway, that's how this works. And then after the password is reset, the user is allowed in. So maybe in your environment, you don't want to force the password reset. Maybe just MFA is good enough for you and you do manual review afterwards. We give you all the options, and it's essentially up to you how you do it. And we have customers that do this many, many different ways. And then this just explains how k-anonymity works. Again, first 5 characters, API responds with all the matches, and then you decide whether that's good enough for you. And at this point, I'll take questions if there are any. And if not, I'll wish you a farewell.
Yeah, no questions have come in yet. I kind of had one though that popped up, Mark, while you were showing the k-anonymity. Is that designed just to enhance the security and privacy of the customer so that we're not actually looking at their real passwords?
Right, exactly. So the idea is that we never want a customer to send us, and it's not sent in clear text, of course, it's done in over HTTPS, SHA-256, et cetera. So the data that is coming our way is encrypted as well, but there's really no good reason for even encrypted for anybody to send us a clear text password. There's always the possibility of some kind of man in the middle. I think the frequency of that actually happening is hugely overblown, but nevertheless, it's not impossible for that to happen. And so there's no good reason for us to send any clear text data out of your environment.
Nice. Yeah, that makes sense. have you had any customers that you work with, concerned about that data privacy element for their customers? And I guess how would you approach that?
So we definitely have customers that are on a spectrum of, I'm going to use the word paranoia, but I'm also cognizant of the phrase, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Um, so let's say that our customers are on a spectrum of worry, if you like. And the very worried customers will be pleased to know that we can salt and hash this data as well as making it SHA-256. So that'll make it yet another layer. And we have customers that do that. So for those that don't think that k-anonymity even is up to their standards, we have ways to enhance it even further. But yes, the whole reason for this is to not send clear text data out of the customer environment.
Excellent. Well, that's good to know. All right, we did have a question come in. So Mark, with the password hash compare k-anonymity, is that going against just have I been pwned, or is this against SpyCloud's entire proprietary data set? Can you maybe explain a little bit more about the data?
Sure. Yeah, that's
Actually,
a good question. So of course we're very aware of have I been pwned, and I personally admire the heck out of Troy Hunt. I think he does an amazing job for basically being one guy. Uh, SpyCloud's big differentiator is that we've essentially industrialized what have I been pwned does. And we have over 200 people that have been working on this for 8 years, and we have a great many more breaches than Troy has. Last estimate, I think he had around 750, and we were over 50,000. So the password check goes against our data. I feel like we have everything Troy has, and then the other thing that that's worthy of mention is that have I been pwned? And again, nothing but respect for that, or for Troy and what he's done. But we give you clear text passwords, and he doesn't have them. And part of the reason we have clear text passwords is because we aggressively crack them. So there's a Slack channel internally that tells us about new breaches and new data that's posted. And just about every week, there's at least 100,000 new passwords that we've cracked. So this is a big part of what we do. And we feel pretty strongly that if you don't know what the actual clear text password is, how are you going to compare it to what's in your environment, right? So we think that that's pretty important. Hopefully that answered your question.
yeah, I think so. And then kind of the malware data as well, right?
Yeah.
Troy has access to all those malware logs, so that's
Right,
another
and
way.
those passwords are almost always in clear text because they're stolen right out of the user's browser. So not only does each successive malware infection give us more passwords, but it gives us more clear text passwords as well. And in
Yeah,
fact, actually, it's quite useful for our password cracking efforts too, because we can then take the new hashes and compare them to the hashes that we're trying to crack, and sometimes we uncover new ones. So that's like the lazy way of cracking passwords, is to take an already cracked password, hash it, and see if it matches one that we already have.
there you go. And you had mentioned all the other data that's siphoned from a info stealer malware infection, like it could be a passkey, API keys, the credit
Yes.
card number. So really anything on that machine. Of course, that's why the malware kind of flow that we showed here is super high risk compared to an old breach without any password reuse, just from the sheer gravity of all of the information that they've stolen from that stealer infection, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So, the reason that the person got infected in the first place is because the bad guys want to steal stuff from them. And among the things that they steal are credentials of all different types, and you've outlined almost all of them a moment ago, so I won't bother repeating them. But all of those were definitely things that get stolen. And then I would also add stuff like crypto wallets, all manner of other things. Actually, what we actually receive are called bot logs. This is a zip file, and when you unpack the zip file, it contains a directory with passwords in it, a directory with cookies in it, a directory with passkeys and other authentication stuff in it. And then, somewhat amusingly, generally speaking, it'll also have a screenshot of the desktop when the person clicked the thing they shouldn't have clicked on. So you can see how people are getting infected. And what we see over and over are people getting infected on home computers when somebody tries to run some sort of a cheat for a video game or something. We see a lot of corporate credentials get exposed this way too, because maybe mom's been working on the computer all day for work, and then in the evening, kid will come over and load a cheat for Call of Duty, and all of mom's employer's credentials are now a matter of, I won't say public record, but the bad guys have them and we get them very soon thereafter. A very common scenario.
So the data we're collecting could be relevant, both for your enterprise, your employees, but your consumers as well, like what we demonstrated here.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, there are sort of three main use cases that SpyCloud customers take advantage of our services for. Employee protection is definitely one. Obviously, the focus today is on consumers. And then we also have some very powerful investigative capabilities that I briefly outlined, talking about some of the other data types, things like social security numbers, credit card numbers, and that kind of stuff.
Excellent. Well, thanks for helping out with those questions, Mark. And for anyone on the call, if you have any additional questions or want to double click on anything that Mark showed, our team will be reaching out to you, or please feel free to connect with your SpyCloud point of contact that you've been working with recently. So yeah, thanks again, Mark. Thanks to you all for joining live, and we'll hope to hear from you soon.
Thanks, folks.